Howdy howdy, this is Mr. Potter. In our previous video we started dealing with our GUIs and we learned how to put text onto a GUI using the J label. And that's great and all, but really just putting J labels on a GUI is almost like just being able to do hello world. We need to have some level of interactivity with these Java programs, with these GUIs. And so what we're going to talk about today is the JButton. Now the button is just going to be a simple button that we can press to achieve some result. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Java file. We'll go ahead and call it button GUI. So we're going to do public class button GUI extends JFrame. And of course, if I'm going to extend JFrame, then I need to make sure that I import. And that's going to be javax.swing.jframe. We're also going to be dealing with javax.swing.jButton, which is kind of the whole purpose of the video. And we're going to import javax.swing.jable. So that way we're going to have labels and buttons on this frame. So I'm going to have my constructor, so public button GUI, which we'll talk about what's going to be in there in just a few minutes. This is supposed to be a constructor, no parameters in there. And we will have a public static void main string args. And all that we're going to do here is we're going to create a button GUI object, which I'll call B. So what we're going to start off with is the four things that we start off before. We're going to go ahead and set size. So set size, and I'm going to set size to 500, 200, just a nice long and short GUI. We're going to set the default close operation. Close operation to exit on close. We're going to set title to be button GUI. And of course the last thing we want to do is set visible to true. So this is basically what we have for our basic GUI. We're going to create two objects in here, and rather than have them just be in the constructor, I'm going to need to reference them in more than one point, so I'm going to have these be variables, instance variables throughout. So I'm going to have private JLabel, which I'll just call label, and private JButton, which I'll call button, for a lack of originality. So inside my constructor, I'll go ahead and initialize these, so I'll say label gets new JLabel, and we'll go ahead and say test, just for some content, and button gets new JButton, and for here, for our constructor for our JButton, this is the text that we want to show up on the button. So I'm going to have it say, click me. So I've got this label and I've got this button, and both of these are going to have text on them. So I'm going to go ahead and have a content pane that we've had before. Remember that to deal with the content pane we have to import a couple of files. We're going to do java.awt.container, which is our actual content pane, and import java.awt.flowLayout. And we're going to do flow layout because as I mentioned in my last video, that's probably the easiest one to do. So we'll go ahead and say container pane gets this dot get content pane. And then we'll go ahead and say pane.setLayout with a new flow layout. And I like the flow layout because it's the simplest one to do. It kind of looks the cleanest, especially if we're going to have something that's very long and short in height. And then I'm going to pane.add a label and pane.add button. Go ahead and put semicolons there. Now if I run this, this is going to show the label, it's going to show the button, but it's not really going to do anything because we haven't set up what we call an action listener. And we'll talk about that as soon as this comes up on the screen. So process completed. And I should see my GUI pop up momentarily. Come on, you can do it. There it is. So I see my test and I see my click me. It's a button, but nothing's happening here. So, and the reason it's not happening is because we haven't set up anything that kind of says, hey, if this is clicked, do this. In order to do that, we have to have an action listener. So, action listener is actually an interface, so we're going to implement action listener. And for the action listener, the method that we have to have for this, the abstract method that we have to write, is public void action performed with some action event E. So I have to have some code here for this. Now, of course, because I'm implementing action listener, I need to make sure that I import it. So I'm going to have import java.awt.event.actionListener. And for the action event, I'm going to have to import java.awt.event.actionEvent. So both of these, because they're dealing with events, I have to load them from java.awt.event. So I've got my class, it implements action listener, which means whenever an action is performed, I need to do something. And I'm just going to have my action, whenever an action is performed, I need to say label.setText to success. So labels have a way to set text, and they also have an accessor called getText. So I can set and get the text from any label. These methods also belong to JButton, and they're also going to be used throughout almost all of the GUI components that we'll be talking about. But just having an action performed doesn't make my button work. I need to add one more line of code. I need to make sure that my button knows that whenever it's triggered, an action should happen. So I'm going to say button.addActionListener, this. And what we're doing here is we're saying that this is some action listener, this button GUI that we've created. I'm telling my button to add a listener to this class so that whenever this class gets the trigger, which it will from the button, it'll run this action performed. So now if I compile, what should happen is every time my button is clicked, my label's text is going to be set to success. I need to implement, not just implement. So let's stop the running and recompile. Remember that when we're dealing with an interface, we have to implement. So here's my button GUI, and I've got test as the label and click me. And when I click on click me, it changes to success. So that's one way that I can do this, but keep in mind that my button GUI has to have one method called action performed. And it's probably going to be very rare that I have just one button. So the question is, how do I distinguish between what incident, what occurrence, what button triggered this? So what I'm going to do is, instead of having success here, I want to put a different string here. And there's e.getActionCommand. And what this does, you'll see what this does. e.getActionCommand is going to tell me what command actually triggered the event. So if I click this, notice that it changes to click me. It changes to the title on the button. So whatever this button text is, that's actually going to get passed through this e.getActionCommand. So what I could have done is I could have said if e.getActionCommand dot equals, and set it equals to click me, then change this text. And we'll go ahead and change this back to success. So what we've done here is we've shown that we can use a button, a JButton, to trigger certain actions and have those actions be run upon other objects inside of my GUI, either by setting label text or, as we'll see later, setting other text to show the appropriate result. So this action performed and this action listener interface allow me to interact with a GUI in ways that just having a JLabel does not. So once again, this is Mr. Potter. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.